Hi, this is TJR, and welcome to part 2 of my review of the Beatles' Sgt Pepper Super Deluxe Edition. In part 1, I only reviewed disc 1, which is just the remix by Giles Martin. In this video, I will begin reviewing the session tracks, which makes up discs 2 through 4. I want to start by saying that a lot of how much you enjoy listening to these session tracks will also depend on how much you enjoy watching bonus features on movie DVDs and Blu-ray. Be it a motion picture, be it an album, I have found that if I am interested in the final production, that I will be interested in the behind-the-scenes material as well. In fact, I find it endlessly fascinating. And the same holds true for the session tracks for Sgt Pepper. But with that said, there are some session tracks that I will listen to and my reaction will be, that's interesting. But I will not include those in random shuffle on my iTunes when I'm listening for pleasure. And then there will be those tracks where I say, hey, I really like that. This is enjoyable all on its own. Throughout this review, I will be identifying tracks in this way. I will also be trying to the best of my ability, identifying when tracks have already been released officially and when they haven't. And if you need me to identify which of these tracks have been released previously on bootlegs, you need to go somewhere else. This is not the right video for you. So let's get started. Now, one thing that I really liked about the way that the 2 CD set or deluxe edition was laid out versus this edition is that the session tracks on the bonus CD are laid out in sequential order, after which you get the session takes for Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane and their respective 2015 and 2016 remixes from Giles Martin. Oddly enough, they didn't do this with the Super Deluxe box set. The expanded session tracks for Sgt Pepper are completely out of order. I do have to wonder why, but there's no explanation for it. Disc 2 opens with 4 session takes of Strawberry Fields Forever. Track 5 is Giles Martin's amazing 2015 remix created for the re-release of the Beatles' One box set.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real.
While none of these earlier 4 working alternate versions compare to the final version, they are entertaining and enjoyable to listen to all on their own. I found it equally enjoyable to hear them in order as I listened to the evolution of this song on the first 4 tracks, and then the satisfaction of concluding it with the final version. I do want to state that some of these session tracks have been released on the Beatles Anthology Volume 2, but I want to stress they've been released in an edited and truncated form. With this Super Deluxe set, we get the full recorded versions for the first time. Now after that, we get take 2 of When I'm 64. This is the same as the one on the 2 CD version and features Ringo on drums, Paul on bass and piano, and John on guitar. This is the basic working track that would later be the finished version. What I like about this is that it shows the Beatles being just very capable as a live unit, which is interesting because at the time that Sgt Pepper was made, they had quit touring, and one of those reasons is because they felt they'd stopped growing as musicians because they just couldn't hear themselves at their live shows anymore due to all the screaming fans. Now up next is 2 working tracks from Penny Lane. With these 2 tracks, we first hear an early recording of just Paul on the piano, and then on the second track, we get Paul guiding a backup vocal session. And during that track, you can hear a more finished version of the song bleeding over faintly from the headphones in the background. I should mention that of these 2 tracks, the one that I found the most enjoyable was, oddly enough, Paul guiding the backup vocal session. When you listen to this track, it really does feel like you're there in the studio with them. This is then rounded off with the 2015 Giles Martin remix for the Beatles One box set. Now, most Beatle fans know that Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane were the first two songs recorded for Sgt. Pepper, but were instead released as singles and therefore not included on the final album. They were, however, included on the Magical Mystery Tour album, which does make me wonder, why not save all of these tracks for the Magical Mystery Tour box set? Were they really thinking that this set wouldn't sell well enough, so we'd better include it here? Up next is A Day in the Life, Take 1 and 2. If you listen to the version of this track on the Beatles Anthology Volume 2, you will hear some similarities, such as John's Sugar Plum Fairy Count-Off, but the versions on this set do sound different. So I'm going to guess that the reason for the similarities is probably from the bouncing down of elements that the Beatles did like onto another tape machine. With both these takes, Paul's Woke Up, Get Out of Bed section is instrumental only, and there's no ending chord on take 1. On take 2, however, which is the version you get on the 2 CD release, we get to hear an alternate hummed ending from a vocal choir that includes Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Marianne Faithfull, Graham Nash, and Michael Nesmith, among others. Apparently at one point this was how they planned on ending the song. We also get a track that is just the orchestra overdub. Apparently they recorded the orchestra with a single 4-track machine so as not to have to bounce down more tracks. And there is another track that is just Paul directing the choir doing their hummed ending. One little bit of revelation from this track comes from a bit of laughter that follows after one of the takes. This bit of laughter sounds suspiciously like the burst of laughter that follows Within You and Without You.
Take 9.
Then we get a track that is just a number of attempts at the final piano chord ending. Apparently, in order to achieve the big piano sound that they got, 4 pianos were recorded simultaneously. Of course, the tricky part is getting everyone to hit the chord exactly so that it sounds like one giant piano chord. A Day in the Life is one of my favorite songs of all time. That being said, I don't think I would include any of these alternate tracks in my iTunes random shuffle listening. But I am very glad that I got to hear them. But with that said, what I would include is if they had given us a vocal choir alternate version of A Day in the Life. Now this would be the final version of A Day in the Life, but instead of ending with the big piano ending, it would end with the hummed ending. This would in no way replace the final version, but I think it would be fun to have for laughs. Then we finally get the title track, Sgt. Pepper. We get take 1, instrumental, and take 9. Take 1 is a very rough instrumental take. Take 9 is the one included on the 2 CD version, and take 9 features the final vocals from Paul that we all know and love, and some extended vamping on the end to make room for the build-up intro of With a Little Help from My Friends. Track 9 is fun enough to warrant future listens, mostly because of Paul's ad-libs at the end. But take 1 is something you only need to hear once. Disc 2 finally finishes off with Good Morning, takes 1 and take 8. Take 1 is less than a minute of the song, and it's in a very rough form. Take 8 gives us the mostly final studio version prior to the horns and other effects being added. Once again, take 1 you only need to hear once. Take 8, I might include this in my iTunes random shuffle, I might not. And this is the version that you get on the 2 CD Deluxe edition. Disc 3 starts with Fixing a Hole, takes 1 and 3. Take 1 features the harpsichord, bass, and drums, and Paul's vocal, and sounds very much like the final studio version, minus the other instruments. The bass is slightly different, and there is some speculation that John might have been playing it. There is also some alternate vocal ad-libbing from Paul at the end, but to be honest, it doesn't really add anything. Oddly enough, take 3, which is a later take, sounds rougher, and there are moments where the band is losing the tempo and speeding up, something that I don't hear anywhere else on these session tracks. The only real notable thing about take 3 is Paul does some vocal vamping at the end that sounds almost menacing. Had this been in the final take of Fixing a Hole, it would have had a very different feel to the ending. Take 3 is what you hear on the 2 CD version, but I don't think I will include either of these on my random iTunes listening. Next is Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, takes 1 and 4, and then take 7. Now, we have heard some of this already on Anthology 2. I have always enjoyed this song, but listening to these rough working tracks, I have to admit the song sounds rather unremarkable. I can only add that it's the sense of menace in John's final vocal performance and the amazing studio production that truly raises this song to a new level. Next is Lovely Rita, Speech, and take 9. On this version, Paul's voice sounds a bit sped up from the final version. He almost sounds a bit like Davy Jones of the Monkees. This version is just the basic rhythm tracks. It's enjoyable enough without the added production. Next is Lucy in the Sky, take 1 and take 5. If there is one thing that I can take away from listening to these two working tracks, it's just how much difference the changing of 1 or 2 notes can sometimes make. John Lennon has still not completely nailed down how he wants to sing the main vocal melody, and the difference is staggering in that regard.
Newspaper taxis appear on the shore, waiting to take you away. Climbing the back.
He is going for a very monotone single note delivery, but later he will modulate just a few notes, and it will make all the difference in the world. Other than that, these two tracks mainly fall into the category of that's interesting from an analytical point of view only. Next is Getting Better, take 1 and take 12. Take 1 is instrumental, and it's amazing how good the song feels on just a bare instrumental level with drums, some guitar, and the electric piano as the main instrument. You also get a good chance to hear Ringo's completely underappreciated subtleties as a drummer. Take 12 is also instrumental, but now we have Paul's bass and the inclusion of the tambura, an Indian instrument played by George. This one also comes off as thoroughly enjoyable on its own without the vocals. After that, we get Within You and Without You, take 1, and George coaching the musicians. Take 1 is an instrumental and plays just fine on its own, and is enjoyable for repeated listenings. George coaching the musicians is interesting, but once again only on an analytical level. After that, She's Leaving Home, take 1 and take 6. These are both instrumental, and they are both amazing to listen to. Take 1 feels like the one used in the final studio version. Take 6 has some variations in the performance that make it stand out from the finished version, but it's equally enjoyable. I will happily include these two instrumental versions in my regular iTunes Random Shuffle and enjoy them as much as the final version. After that, with a little help from my friends, take 1, False Start. This was of course included in the 2 CD version, and this is instrumental only, and yet it is surprisingly enjoyable all on its own. Then comes the Sgt Pepper Reprise. Now what works about this track is just how tight and rocking the band sounds live on it. What's not working is Paul's rather lackadaisical, almost lounge singer vocal. This of course wasn't included on the final version, but I'm guessing that this is probably just a scratch track vocal to help the band know where they are in the song as they recorded, and was probably never intended to be considered as a final vocal take.
Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts
In many ways, the mono release is audibly different from the US stereo release, and it is the Beatles approved version. For this reason, Giles Martin used it as his guide. This 2017 remix is taking what made the original mono mix unique from its stereo counterpart and moves it into stereo. Now after this, we get the original mono mixes of Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. These are the same mixes as the 2009 mono box set of Magical Mystery Tour, and I'm guessing they are being included just for reference. Then we have A Day in the Life, the first mono mix. This is the first mono mix of A Day in the Life, but the orchestra is still not there. What's remarkable about this track is that it features a very different vocal take from Paul and a different echo effect on the vocals themselves. It's also fun to hear Paul say, "Oh shit," and then chuckle after flubbing a line. Then we get Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, original mono mix number 11. Now, from what I've read, this particular mix was considered lost, only to be uncovered decades later while searching through the archives in preparation for this edition. Now, I have to say, while it's great that they did find this mix, I also have to say that there is little to distinguish it from the mix we ended up getting on the final album release. The phasing effect on John's voice is a little bit more upfront, and really that's about it. After that is She's Leaving Home, first mono mix. Now this mix has the harp slightly detuned at the opening, and I would say that this is a studio effect. And there are also some different melodic transitions from the orchestra as well. I am glad they didn't go with the detuning effect at the opening, but it's still very beautiful to listen to. I would listen to this for enjoyment as well. Finishing up disc 4 is Penny Lane, the original Capitol Records mono US promo mix. Try to say that 3 times fast. This track serves to remind us just how bad those Capitol Record mono versions were. The audio is murky and peaking towards distortion. You can hear these on the Capitol Years box set, which I will never recommend that you buy, and this track will attest to that. Now, with all this talk from me about how you only need to hear some of these tracks once and how a lot of these won't hold up to repeated listenings from me, or I won't be putting them in my iTunes random shuffle, you may be getting the impression that I didn't like listening to a lot of these, and nothing could be further from the truth. I really appreciate getting to hear all of these. But once again, how you respond to these session tracks will depend largely on how much you like behind-the-scenes content. I love behind-the-scenes content. But to be honest, when I own a movie on Blu-ray or DVD, the bonus material, some of it I may only ever watch once and maybe not watch again until many, many years later, whereas the movie, which I love, I will watch over and over again. The same true holds for this. I'm going to listen to Sgt Pepper for the rest of my life, and I'm going to listen to that album over and over and over again. Who knows how many times I've heard it in my lifetime, and who knows how many more times I'm going to hear it yet again. Some of these tracks do hold up to repeated listens, and some of them I will probably not listen to again for a long time to come. But I'm glad that I got to hear all of them. So, have you listened to the session tracks yet? What are your thoughts? I'm curious to know what you have to say. This is TJR. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe to the channel.